That's not a good thing. You don't want to shut down your ETC. Okay, talking about alternative pathways. A couple of things I wanted to point out. We focused on sugars. So sugars, we're in this main kind of pathway in the middle, if you will. So we focus on those, but we have to remember these things are interconnected with lots of other pathways. So these intermediates can feed in or out of these pathways depending on what they're used for. I wanted to just mention and point out that protein can also be degraded to amino acids. And the amino acids can feed in either through pyruvate or into the Krebs cycle. And you can get energy from those as well. So you don't always have to start at the beginning of the cycle to get NADH and FADH out of it. So proteins, you know, they go through your stomach and your digestive system. They're degraded to amino acids. And then they can feed into Krebs. Well, either they feed into pyruvate oxidation, if they're pyruvate, or Krebs. It depends on the amino acid. So whichever amino acid is being broken down, then they can feed in different places. So if you feed in somewhere in the middle, you can still get some ATP from that eventually. The other one I want to point out is fatty acids, or just fats. Fats in your digestive system are broken down into fatty acids and glycerol. And we don't care much about the glycerol, but it can be actually converted to other sugars. But the fatty acids then can be transported into the mitochondrial matrix where they go through their own pathway to form energy. So fatty acids, they are transported or enter the mitochondrial matrix, and they go through a process called beta oxidation, which is a pathway that breaks them down. I want to just show you this pathway. You don't have to memorize it or memorize any of the numbers. You do have one question on the homework that shows you how much ATP you can get from them. So I want to run through it with you once. Okay, so let's just take a look at it. This is especially important for some people whose sugar pathways are not working. They can go through beta oxidation. So sometimes diabetics have this issue where they burn a lot of fats in their mitochondria. But basic idea is the fatty acids are transported in. That costs money. So if you actually see here, we have to burn an ATP at the beginning to start the process. So it's kind of like glycolysis, where remember we had to burn some ATPs to get glycolysis started, and then we got a bunch of energy from it. Same thing here. Fatty acid, it can be lots of different lengths, right? There's lots of different types of fatty acids, but they kind of all go through the same process. And here, what you see is a cycle. So there's 1, 2, 3 or so catalyzed reactions in the mitochondria. And every time you go through it, you cut off an acetyl-CoA, which is made up of 2 carbons, okay? And then every time you go through it, you also make an FADH and an NADH. So I'm just going to simplify this. I'm going to redraw it just as simple. So let's say you have, I don't know, an 18 carbon fatty acid. It's going to go into beta oxidation. So we have to burn an ATP up here, right? Okay, so we're starting the process. And then every time you go through the cycle, you get 1 acetyl-CoA, which is 2 carbons long. 2 carbons long, if you look at the structure. And you get what? You get 1 FADH2 and 1 NADH. So how many cycles do we have to go through? This is a trick question, by the way. 18 carbons, so draw it out. Why did I make it 18? I don't know. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. It's a kinky one. Thank you. I had to use that joke one more time this semester. There's a smile on there. How many cycles do we have to go through if we're cutting off 2 carbons at a time? No, it's not 9. We go 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7. What do we have left? 4 carbons, 8. And you have 2 carbons. See how that works? So 8 cycles for this particular one. So what do we get then at the end? How many acetyl-CoA do we get? Yeah, the 8th, we cut it into 2. We actually get 9, don't we? So you get 9 acetyl-CoA. Okay. Acetyl-CoA is what it says. How many FADH and NADH? How many cycles? 8 NADH. Are we done? Where did this take place? On purpose? Where is this pathway? Mitochondrial matrix. So what happens to acetyl-CoA? Krebs. It goes into Krebs. So we run 9 cycles of Krebs, don't we? And you get more ATP and NADH and FADH. And then where do the NADH and FADH2 from Krebs and from beta oxidation go? I just have the picture here. Those things feed right into ATP. So convert everything to ATP. You'll see you get a boatload of ATP from just an 18 carbon sugar, not sugar, 18 carbon fat. In fact, if you just looked at 6 carbons of a fat versus 6 carbons in a sugar like glucose, you'll see you get about 1/3 more ATP. So that's, I think, one reason why we store fat so well. We store it so well is because we can get a boatload of energy out of it. Fortunately. Okay, so just try it on the homework. You won't have to do a calculation like that on the exam. I might ask you what it is. What is beta oxidation? And you could just say it's cutting fatty acids down to acetyl-CoA, something like that. Any questions on that? You can try it out. I think the homework has a 12 carbon fatty acid, so it'd be fewer cycles. Yep.
Why are you putting every 2 carbons together?
Oh yeah, because it cuts 2 off at a time.
Okay.
So if you look at this picture again, every time it goes through this cycle, it gets 2 carbons shorter. It's because it's producing this acetyl-CoA right there.
Okay.
That's why. Yeah.
So 2 questions. This AMP plus the 2 Ps, what drives up the ADP?
Oh, AMP is a monophosphate, so it's actually cutting off 2 phosphates at a time.
Right.
You don't have to worry about that.
Okay. And when it says it binds to inorganic phosphate, where do you find these phosphates? Are they just free floating in the mitochondria, or where do you get these phosphates?
It binds to a
So
phosphate.
like when we talk about ADP,
Right.
ADP2P, like
Oh, ADP going back to ATP? Yeah, there's just phosphate ions floating around.
okay,
Yeah, they're ions like any other ion.
sure.
They come through whatever, your diet or wherever we get phosphates from. I don't know. I don't think we make phosphate. I think we always get it from somewhere. Always got calcium phosphate is an additive. I don't know. That's a good question, but I think it's always just there. We just assume it's always there. Because it's usually not a limiting thing. Okay, we're done with chapter 9. Any other questions on? I did post the study guide, so you can go through and look at everything that's listed for chapter 9. It's a ton of stuff, so hopefully you've been working on it the last few weeks.
When's the exam on chapter 9?
It's next week sometime.
Okay.
I posted it. You should find it under the quizzes on Canvas. It doesn't. It's got a 2-day window again. So, but it won't open until I forget the date. Sorry. So just check it. That's why I use Canvas, because I always forget about the due dates. But they do show up every time you log in, don't they? Especially within a week, they'll show up on your things to do. Yeah. Yeah, we'll have class. So, I don't know. Depends on what the schedule says. I'll have to go back and look what the schedule says. So, Because we didn't have it last time, did we? Yeah. Yeah, we probably take the day off then, like usual. Okay. Chapter 10. We good to start? Everybody's got the questions done? Very good. So today we're going to have a little bit of an intro to photosynthesis. It hopefully won't be as scary because you've seen several different pathways now. And photosynthesis really is just another series of pathways just with different players. So I'm hoping that it won't be as scary. You'll also see an example of an electron transport chain. So you can kind of use what we've learned in respiration and apply it to photosynthesis. Now I know you guys, what you guys are saying is it's just plants, right? Well, plants are important. Yes? They do a couple things for us, yeah? Actually, let's start, usually start with some interdisciplinary learning. You know what that is? Where you do other things other than biology. So we're going to do some poetry. You ready? Repeat after me. Roses are red.
Roses are red.
Violets are blue.
Violets are blue.
Without green plants,
Without green plants,
there'd be no you.
there be no you.
Yeah?
Got it.
What do you think?
Love it.
Why? What do they do for us? Oh, oxygen. Wait, we don't need that, do we?
Just a little.
What is it again? The final electron acceptor of aerobic respiration? Yeah, we kind of need that, don't we? Where do we get oxygen from? We breathe it in. Where does it come from? Plants. Or at least photosynthetic things, photosynthetic bacteria, I guess, as well. The things that are doing photosynthesis. What else do they provide? Yeah, remember we are heterotrophs. What does that mean? We steal energy in the form of sugars and other things from other organisms, right? Unfortunately, I wish we could sit out in the sun like plants do. Plants are autotrophs. It does not mean they make their own energy, right? Law number one, energy is not made. So where do plants get their energy? The sun, ultimately, right? All of our energy comes from the sun. They capture that energy. That's what we're going to look at. In fact, there's two parts to photosynthesis. The photo part is going to be the conversion of light energy to chemical. So the photo part is, and it's really a conversion, they're not creating anything. But we're going to learn that light does have energy associated with it. And they're going to form chemical energy in the form of bonds. So they're going to use excited electrons to make bonds, okay? But then, a lot of students, they confuse this, the synthesis part. So plants aren't making energy, they're not making ATP, but what are they doing for the synthesis part? No, they make sugars. Now here's a classic example of what we call compartmentalization. The plants are going to use chloroplasts to capture energy and make sugars. That's the second part, synthesis. To make something, they're going to make sugars, and really what they start to make is glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. It's that 3-carbon sugar. And then you can use that to basically make any sugars you want, including cellulose. So they make sugars using CO2, that's going to be the starting material, and this chemical energy right here, the chemical energy that comes from the photo part. So in the chloroplasts, they're making sugars, but then what do they do with the sugars? Well, they can use them to make other things, or they break them down through what? Aerobic respiration. So what does that mean they have as well, in addition to chloroplasts? Ribosomes are proteins. We haven't gotten there yet. That's the next chapter. Mitochondria. So they have both. They're much cooler than we are, aren't they? Yeah, plants are so much cooler. They can sit out in the sun as long as they have leaves. They're losing them now. But they photosynthesize out in the sun, they make their own sugars, and then they use the sugars in their mitochondria to make ATP. So that's where all the ATP comes from, is the mitochondria. The classic example of compartmentalizing different processes in different organelles. So it's a different process. Okay. So these things are tied together, and they're basically pathways. So the light-dependent reactions are going to be absorbing sunlight energy in the form of photons, and they're going to be making things like ATP and NADPH. That's just a cousin of NADH. You guys know what NADH does? It's the what? The taxi cab, right? It's the energy carriers. So they're going to form chemical energy in the form of these things, and these things are going to just pile into what's called the Calvin cycle. So we'll see the Calvin cycle is a cycle where we make sugars, okay? Is that going to take energy? Well, isn't that kind of the opposite of respiration? Respiration, we went from what? Glucose to what? And it was mainly what kind of energetics? Endergonic? I mean, at the beginning is a little bit of endergonic, right? And then all exergonic. So it's overwhelmingly exergonic. Well, if you're going to go this way, this is aerobic respiration. This is basically photosynthesis. What are we going to need? A boatload of energy to do this. Because CO2, very little energy in CO2. But to make that back in the sugars, you're going to need a bunch of energy, and that's what they use the sunlight for, okay? So this is going to be highly endergonic, isn't it? Most of it's going to be endergonic. You're piling energy into these bonds, making sugar bonds. Okay. So let's start talking about this energy, what they're going to deal with. You guys got the photosynthesis down? 2 parts that are linked. Okay. So we want to do a little bit of physics. This is not a replacement for a physics class, but I need you to know that light is actually made up of 2 different parts, or it has 2 different characteristics, if you will. You have this packet of energy. It's like a particle. Somebody asked me this morning if it was made up of chemical elements, and it totally flustered me because I'm like, what? I don't think so. It's just a particle. It's a piece of matter, basically, that can have different characteristics, but it has energy associated with it. It's called a photon, right? You guys heard of that? Photon lasers. Okay, so but these photons, these light particles also have a wavelength associated with them. And the energy that's found in the photon is related to the wavelength. So as the sun is beaming down on us, we're actually getting tilted with lots of different wavelengths of light. You guys have probably seen this before. You've seen the light spectrum before? So visible light kind of goes from about 400 to 700 nanometers. I always forget, I think it's 10 to the minus 9th meters. Is that nano? So very small wavelengths we're talking about to begin with. You don't have to memorize this, okay? So don't worry about it. Just realize there's different wavelengths. But then as you see this, there's a relationship between energy and wavelength. So as we kind of go out of the visible range and we go this way with decreasing wavelengths, what do we hit? UV light? Anybody know anything about UV, ultraviolet? Guys, your parents didn't slather you with sunscreen every time you stepped out for even 5 minutes? You're not part of that generation? Not part of my generation. I don't think I had seatbelts as a kid in a car. It's a different thing. Nobody knows anything about UV? Really? You forget that we're a mile high in Cedar? You stay out in the sun long enough? Were you going up to Panguitch where it's 9,000 feet or whatever it is? Sunburns? So what I'm talking about, sunburn. Yeah, what's wrong with you? And after lunch? Is that the problem? You get sunburns, right? What is, the UV rays are actually damaging your epidermal cells, damaging the nucleic acids. So that's why you get sunburns, and then your skin sloughs off, right? If you do that repeatedly, you can have other issues like cancer, yeah? Sometimes. So we'll talk about that later when we talk about mutations. When UV light is damaging, what about X-rays? This is funny. Well, as a kid at the dentist, they used to come in, they put that lead blanket over my body, and then leave the room. They aim the thing at you. They used to do this. I don't know if they do this anymore. My dentist here in Cedar doesn't. Why? Why do they put this big lead blanket on you? What's wrong with X-rays? What are they protecting? Yeah, your organs, your sex organs, especially those things, right? Yeah. It's called your gonad. Have you ever heard of that before? It's a good band name, I think. Oh, your sex cells, right? Because those X-rays, you used to get pelted by them, they can damage other cells in your body and try to protect you. Now it's such a small dose, the lady doesn't even need the room. She just puts it right there, a little zap, that's it. The technology's a lot better. What about gamma rays? Are they pretty strong? Don't say it. I know somebody's going to say, who's the Marvel guy? Yeah, the Hulk, right? Is it Marvel? You're not getting it wrong. I might get beat up. It's DC or something else. Right, but gamma rays, we're getting hit with gamma rays right now, aren't we? Yeah, they're so strong, they go through the building, they go through our body, they go into the earth for a little while, at least. So those things are really, really small wavelengths. So they're very, very powerful. And they can penetrate long distances. You have to work or something under the ground to get away from them, okay? So wavelength and energy has kind of an inverse relationship. I just want to point this out. So as you have, what did we say, decreasing wavelength? If you have decreasing wavelength, you actually get increasing energy. So it's an inverse relationship. And we use the lambda, this lowercase lambda, to represent wavelengths. So decreasing lambda gives you increasing energy. Okay? I just want to point that out because some plants will be able to absorb different wavelengths of light. And it's usually in the visible range. And that means you're going to have differing amounts of energy associated with that. So I just wanted to point that out, that there will be differences. Are we cool with that? So again, you don't have to memorize the numbers, but I want you to realize this relationship. So if you go the other direction where the wavelengths are increasing, like radio waves, luckily our cellular phone waves are over there on the radio waves, so we're not getting blasted every time we use the phone. I think there was a big hubbub about that a few years ago, but I forget now. Anyways, those are going to be less powerful because they have longer wavelengths. Okay, so what? We don't care about that, do we? Yeah, we do. What happens when they encounter plants? When they encounter the molecules of plants? That's what we really want to know. What happens when these photons hit plants? Well, they can bounce off. Anybody know what colors are bounced off of plants most? Yeah, greens and yellows. Don't most plants look green to us? Unless it's a flower or something? Yeah, because that's what's reflecting up or scattering up. Same thing with paints. The paint color you see is not the paint, the color they're actually absorbing. It's the colors they're reflecting. They're scattering back to our eye. So they can be scattered. We don't really care about those. They can go through, we transmit it, we don't really care about those. But what we do care about is when they can be absorbed. When they can be absorbed. So it turns out the plants have a lot of pigments, just like paints, that can absorb different wavelengths of light. And you already told me the light that they usually don't absorb. But what happens to the light that they do? Does it just disappear? First law, what was a photon? Photon's energy. Can energy just disappear? No. Law number one, isn't it? So these photons are energy. When they can be absorbed, that energy is not just going to disappear. The plant is going to be able to use that energy, that pocket of energy, depending on the wavelength, right? But it's going to be able to use that energy to do work. And we're going to see how it captures it and converts it into electron energy, basically. Okay. So plants, hey, don't I have a, there it is. Oh, this was just a color kind of showing what's going on. So it's going to absorb some light and reflect others. And this scale kind of shows which ones are being absorbed and which ones are being reflected. So most plants, not all, but most plants are going to absorb heavily in the blues and purples range and in the oranges and reds, okay? So most plants have a variety of pigments, and these variety of pigments are going to be able to absorb photons of different energies, basically. Okay, so they kind of, it's like a butterfly net, or what else? Like a satellite dish. You guys know what satellite dishes are. What do they point out at space? Because they're collecting rays from a satellite, right? Same thing here. These pigments are going to be able to capture these photons of light and then transfer them to enzymes to do work, okay? So it's like a big net capturing it. And you've probably heard of some of these, like chlorophylls. You've heard of chlorophyll as an example of a pigment. Carotenoids is another one. They're found in like carrots. They usually have an orange color. These aren't the only ones, though. There's several different ones that they find in plants, okay? Where are they? Where are these pigments? Oh, sorry, am I going too fast? Just kind of intro material. So you kind of want to have an idea of how these plants are working. So you want to get used to these. Okay, so where are these things? We want to look a little bit at the structure of a leaf, okay? When you look at a leaf, it does have a skin layer, just like we do, an epidermal layer, okay, on either side. And then it has a bunch of mesophyll cells in the middle. So it's almost like our mesoderm, okay, different layers of skin. Most of the photosynthetic cells are going to be in this mesophyll layer. They do have a vasculature. You know what that is? In the humans, what is that equivalent to? Yeah, veins and arteries, right? Why? Well, they have to transfer sugars and ions and things all over the plant, right? And transpiration occurs. So plants take up water from the roots. The water has to travel through the plant and then come out the leaves as well. So that's how it moves things around. So, what is it, the xylem and phloem over there? Plant biology. Okay, it also has openings on the outside. Why does it need these little openings called stoma or stomata? They're pretty cool. They're guarded by guard cells. I don't know if we're going to look at this in lab or not this semester. I think my class is going to. But they're guarded. They actually open and close. But what do they allow? Yeah, water. What other gases? Why carbon dioxide? Something on this side. Why does carbon dioxide have to get in? What does it use CO2 for? Yeah, make sugars, right? So it's got to get the CO2 from somewhere. It comes from the environment, from us, right? We breathe out, or our cars breathe out, whatever, and they go in. What comes out other than water? Oxygen. Oxygen. Yay for us, right? That they share a little bit of their oxygen gas with us, okay? Or a lot. Okay, let's take a look at a mesophyll cell, or just a regular cell, right? So plants are eukaryotic. They have a cell wall for structure. They have all the other characteristics of a cell. But look, they have mitochondria. Didn't I tell you? See, I wasn't lying. Picture says it, okay? And then they have these chloroplasts. So that's what we're going to focus on, is the chloroplast structure. We take a look at these guys. Doesn't that look kind of cool? So chloroplasts they do have a dual lipid bilayer, just like mitochondria. But they have these weird structures in the middle as well. That's what we want to kind of focus on. These pile of, I don't know, what do they look like? Pancakes or something to make you hungry? Yeah, they're like flattened discs that they're not hollow, but they do have an inside as well called the lumen. These things are called thylakoids. Thylakoids. So let's just draw a chloroplast here. Inside the chloroplast, this is where we're going to find these pigments. that will absorb the different wavelengths of light. So here's our chloroplast. Am I still in the picture? Yep. And inside the chloroplast, we have these grana or granum. So that's a stack of pancakes or thylakoids. Okay. And then each one of these is a thylakoid. So each little disc is called a thylakoid. Okay. This is really where all of our photosynthesis is going to occur, is in these thylakoids. So the thylakoid, this is the chloroplast. There are some other terms on here you want to know. So we have a granum is a stack of thylakoids. The thylakoids have a lumen or an inside. The inside of the chloroplast that's not part of the thylakoid, that's called the stroma with an R. Don't confuse that with stoma. I didn't come up with the term, sorry. What is the stroma like when you compare it to the mitochondria? Yeah, it's like the matrix, okay? So the stroma is the matrix of the chloroplast. Does that help? The inside of the chloroplast. Okay, that's where the Calvin cycle enzymes will be when we look at them. Okay, let's go back to the thylakoid. So this is the thylakoid. Can I just draw a thylakoid over here? So it looks like a little flattened disc. The outside is the stroma, right? The inside is the lumen or the thylakoid space. Sometimes I call it that. So there is a space inside. So these are membrane bound. They're not an organelle, right? They're inside an organelle, but they are membrane enclosed. This is going to be important later on. And what we're going to see is that in these membranes, so in the thylakoid membrane, we're going to find pathways of enzymes called photosystems, okay? So this pathway here is going to be called a photosystem. And the photosystem is made up of enzymes plus pigments. So the membranes, in the membranes are going to be packed full of these pigments. And it's going to be the pigments that are going to be absorbing different or all sorts of wavelengths of light, of photons, okay? And then the pigments are going to be able to pass that energy onto the enzymes, and the enzymes are going to do work with that energy, okay? Just like we've seen before. So this hopefully won't be as scary because these photosystems look exactly like the electron transport chain in the matrix of mitochondria, or in the inner membrane of mitochondria.
So is the inner membrane of the chloroplast folded like the inner membrane of the...
Yeah. It's funny here, the inner membrane of the chloroplast doesn't really play much of a role. So we're not going to see anything special about this inner membrane space. Now the inner membrane, it doesn't show it here, is connected to the thylakoids, but it's not going to be much of a, it's not going to be used as a function like we saw it in mitochondria. Now, is it folded? I don't think so, but I'd have to go back and check. Does it have the folds that the mitochondria does? I don't think it does. But I think these thylakoids are going to stay, they're going to serve the same purpose. Because if you have thousands of these thylakoids in each chloroplast, and you probably have, I don't know, hundreds, if not thousands of chloroplasts in the cell, what do each of these membranes give you then? Just like the folds. What were the roles of those folds? Surface area. Because those things are going to be packed full of enzymes which are going to be transporting ions. Okay? So I don't think it is, but I have to double check. That's a good question. Does anybody know? I don't know. The inner membrane of that, we'd have to look up an electron micrograph of the chloroplast. Okay, so I want you to kind of have an idea of the structure. You need to know the terms. Okay, so you know what you're talking about. So when we talk about thylakoids, you want to think about this structure. And what I'll show next time is that these are kind of what the photosystems look like. They've got proteins along with a lot of pigments, like this one is a chlorophyll. So they're going to work together to capture the energy to do work. Here's another kind of picture of it. So on Wednesday, we're going to look at how these things capture the energy and then excite electrons to do work. Okay, what else? Anything else? Any questions on this chloroplast, thylakoids structure? Yeah, okay. Wednesday we'll come in, we'll draw our thylakoid, and we'll go through the photo part of it, and probably start Kelvin cycle as well.